G'day guys, Mike with the Outer Circle. In today's episode, we're going to be doing a review on the Creality K2 Plus combo. I was given one of these units for free through Creality, so straight up front, going to tell you that. But as you would know from previous reviews, that has not coloured my perception of the unit at all, because there are going to be negatives that I bring up as we go throughout this. What's shocking though, is the amount of negatives I'm going to bring up is just, it's minimal. In fact, this is going to get the highest review of any 3D printer I've ever actually demoed or displayed on the channel. And it's kind of shocking because the unit that I got was a early production model, not a pre-production model, but an early production model. And, well, to put it sort of bluntly up front, this printer is fantastic. If you've got the money and you can afford it, go and buy one. But what's interesting to me is essentially people want to say that, you know, it's a Bambu clone or something like that, which is not really true. For a start, Bambu is more like a Voron clone, but that's another story. No, what we have here is Creality looking at what Bambu did. And they brought out the K1 series. So the K1, the K1 Max, which I have two of, and the K1C, which was a carbon fiber, but for all intents and purposes was really just an upgraded K1. And if you were going to go down the route of K1, just buy K1C. It's better for your purposes. And that was their competitor to essentially Bambu Labs P1P, P1S, and X1C. And well, Bambu really shook up the market here because no one else was really creating the kind of machines that they were. Now, in that sort of Creality machines that came at that time, they're what I'll call the mid-generation. So we're talking 12, 14 months back these machines came out. And Bambu, we're talking a couple of years back now. So Bambu had this set of releases that really shook up the industry. Core XY and a lot of functionality straight out of the box, as well as full color 3D printing in a pretty tidy system. It worked pretty efficiently. The downside of the system though was it had a lot of waste. And well, Creality got in on the, yep, we're going to make the same sort of printer units as this. And that's where the K1 series came from. But the K2, this is a different beast. So, first things first, the K2 obviously has the AMS unit called the CFS. Well, what's the AMS? That's that unit on top that provides you, that you can see in this image, providing you with multiple spools of filament. And like on the Bambu units, it holds 4 spools of filament, and you can link 4 of them together, giving you a total of 16 potential colors to pick from during your printing, or 16 different materials to pick from in your 3D printing. Why they didn't make it wider and make it 5, considering the width of the machine would easily handle 5 stacked on top, I don't know. Also, why did they pick the shapes they picked for it, and not just a square box where you could stack one on top of the other or something? I don't know. Those are sort of quirks / downsides, I think, of the unit. Now, people have complained about the placement of the CFS, and I will do a video entirely dedicated to this, as a matter of fact. But nonetheless, I managed to put my CFS unit beside the printer, and it's able to function perfectly fine beside my printer. All I did was created a special slide slot that allows the scraps or purgings that fall out the back to be fed away to a separate waste tin. So, problem solved there. But the long and short of the CFS system is it works quite well. It is better than the Bambu Labs system, and I would say it's better than the Anycubic system. I don't know about some of the other ones that are coming up the line because they're all essentially doing the same thing. It's just a few, like the Creality CFS, have learned from the mistakes of the Bambu AMS and have improved on it in some pretty significant ways. Anyway, that's enough about that part of the system. Let's talk about the rest of the printer now. So, yes, it has the different materials. It also has an RFID scanner built into the side of the machine, which is great. That RFID scanner is going to allow you to automatically detect materials that have ID tags and adjust the settings accordingly for those materials without having to go in manually and update the UI. Using the UI inside the machine, very, very simple. You essentially just tap on the material, select what it is, whether it's Creality brand or off-brand version of a material, and what color it is. You've got a pretty good selection of colors to pick from in there, and it works fantastically. As you can see in this image, of course, they've got multiple CFS units stacked up, and they've got them on these special little bracket mounting trays. I don't know how they're supplied. I haven't seen them myself. I'm also curious because I don't know how you plug them all in together, because the unit I've got only has one port going into the machine, and yeah, I'm not sure how you link them all up. I would have to buy 3 more CFSs to figure this one out, and I just don't have a need for it, to be honest. So not the way I'm heading, and I'm not a big fan of multicolor printing in general. It does have its uses, but well, you'll see why later on in this episode. So, ignoring a lot of this marketing spin, let's get to some negatives. So, first negatives here. As you can see in the image on the left, we have the Z-axis screws. There are only 2 Z-axis screws. I guess this is easier for timing and adjusting for the bed leveling purposes when they build the machines in factory. But it's using 4 linear rods to stop the bed from slopping in any one direction, because the sheer weight of the bed being held up and pivoting on those 2 screws. Why they didn't use 4 with 2 linear rails in the middle, or linear rods in the middle, I don't know. I think it's just a money thing. Makes the production cheaper on the unit. But I don't feel it's as stable as it probably should be, which is a downside to me. The build plate that it came with is actually really good. I haven't had any issues with it. Realistically, the only sort of bed adhesion failure I had, I was able to print the exact same file, slice the exact same way, just adding a 5mm brim, solve the issue. Of course, glue stick is given to you and advised to be used with it. They've also moved away from the linear rods, which the K1 series had, for your X-axis, and instead they now have a linear rail on top of a thin sort of RHS frame moving back and forth. The extruder itself, interesting sort of system they've gone with here. So on the extruder assembly, what we have is a much larger extruder unit. However, now instead of having to undo all these screws and, like on my K1 Max, removing the LiDAR sensor and a few other things to get to it, you can just remove with magnets the simple front housing and you've got full access pretty much. Great, fantastic. Where was that before? So good improvement there. Sensors wise, all of that's really good as well. And we actually have a new set of gearing inside there, and it is metal. It's metal gearing. Oh, great. We can actually go for things like carbon fiber straight out of the gate. So what we have here is a printer where it's like, hey, I don't actually have to perform any modifications. See, on my K1 Max, I love that printer. In fact, I bought a second one and ran it side by side with the review one at the same time to see how, random sampling, right? Multiple printers. And they've been fantastic. And I've just performed an upgrade on there to improve the nozzle and the hot end, and to improve the extruder by putting in all metal gearing system. Well, this machine, I don't have to do any of that. It comes this way from factory. Okay, that's good. It's got a little blade in there as well to help slice the filament and keep it clean to retract it through the system and the CFS. Fantastic. Have had 0 issues with that system so far. Okay, good. What about the extruder itself? Well, it's a very tall unit, but as you can see, we have a titanium alloy with copper alloy that's been press fitted essentially onto it, and the copper alloy combined with the titanium means low corrosion, high wear resistance, and pretty good heat transfer, and then hardened steel in the nozzle so that it obviously can last longer when it's using abrasive materials such as carbon fiber PLA. Good. All of these are good signs and good improvements so far. The negative though, when you have a very long nozzle like this one is, and you can see just how long it is on the right side of this frame, that means that when you have to purge the materials, say you're doing a color change, you have to purge an awful lot of material out. So you end up with what we call poop in the 3D printing world. These purgings of material, and they're quite large what actually comes out of it, which means when you're doing a lot of color swaps, boy, do you get a lot of waste. For example, I have a time lapse, I believe, and finished results for I think it was a Teen Titans. Someone wanted me to 3D print them, this little Teen Titans figure, and no worries, Teen Titans Go, whatever it was, printed that for them. But the amount of waste compared to the finalized model, this model was like I'm going to say 35-40 minute print without color swaps. With color swaps, I think it was over 7 hours. So yeah, and a lot of that time is just moving back and forth and purging and color changing. Very frustrating. Now, in line with the machine itself having this improved nozzle, it has something else which is lacking, and not just lacking from Creality, but was lacking in the Bambu machines and is now present in these machines, heated chamber. So the central of the 3 vents at the rear of the machine is actually pushing heated air into the chamber, and the other 2 vents are carbon-filled, or charcoal carbon-filled, purification vents. And I was running ASA through this machine, and boy, did that chamber work perfectly hot to temperature. We're talking a 60-degree chamber, 100-degree bed, and a 250, 280 degrees nozzle, something in that ballpark. This thing was running hot, and yet the temperature was controlled beautifully with the heating system. And ASA, being a butyl styrene, acrylonitrile styrene acrylate, that plastic has some nasty-ish fumes, and it can actually give you styrene poisoning after exposure to it in the air. That fumes, I put a fume reader in there. I wasn't getting anything. Those filters are working perfectly. The downside is, how do you know when those filters have, filled up and they need replacing? You kind of don't know this when something has reached saturation. But if you were to, say, place a scoop onto the back of this, which then plumbed it to external from your building, then, which I'm planning to do, yeah, definitely that's going to be a worthwhile system long term. I still wouldn't put 10 of these printers into one room, print a bunch of ABS or ASA in there with me present. I think that at some point that material is going to get out. Now, the print quality on this, yeah, it's good. Is it on par with, say, the Bambu X1C, which is essentially, that's the competitor, right? Ignore all other printers in the market. These are the 2 competitors going head to head, because Creality K2 is 1 generation ahead of where the competition is, and it's on par, if not slightly ahead of Bambu's offerings, which is interesting to see because Bambu had a machine that worked straight out of the box and had color 3D printing. This thing's working straight out of the box with color 3D printing. This is essentially an appliance. And one of my friends, Rudolph, runs a Grimdark Terrain, a 3D STL manufacturing, and he's looking at producing stuff for filament 3D printing, including tiles. And I recommended this printer to him, and he bought one on my recommendation, and he fully agreed with me. We were talking about it last night. Yeah, this thing is an appliance. It is like a microwave. You pull it out of the box, you turn it on, and it just worked. There has been minimal amount of adjustments having to be made by the operator. Those adjustments are going to be more around the materials than the machine if your materials are not playing the game with you. And that's a really interesting space to be in 3D printing, because for a decade now, we've been making these machines and modifying everything about them, creating our own custom programs for them, putting tons of our own parts on there, changing bed leveling and tensions and all sorts of things. No need with this machine. It's wonderful. So how's it getting this quality? So, yep, you have cooling fans on either side, and these cooling fans, unlike on my K1 Max review where I said they felt really cheap and tacky, they're really nicely integrated. They look attractive inside the package. It feels more premium. But the dual AI cameras, this is where it's at. So, what are they actually doing? Well, they removed the LiDAR that was on the previous generation, the K1 series, and instead, inside that hot end, in fact, if I scroll up here, you might see the camera. It's living inside the housing just next to the nozzle, and it is scanning everything that nozzle does inside the printer. There it is, right there. In green, it's highlighted. So, when this printer is actually performing, what it does is it lays down a series of lines and it's optically measuring them to make sure that everything is the correct size to get that flow rate optimized. What is the flow rate? Well, we're talking the amount of plastic that comes out in a given time frame from the nozzle, and matching the amount of plastic coming out with the speed of the machine so that the plastic is neither too fast nor too slow coming out. It's in that Goldilocks zone. It's just right. That's what that toolhead AI camera is doing. And ignore the AI stuff. It's really just a pretty basic algorithm here. On the other hand, the other camera, which is beautifully, and it doesn't feel like a tacked on last minute thought this time because there's a molded housing for it. The other camera is allowing us our time lapses, and that one is also looking for print failure detection, and it has actually worked. So credit to them there. These things are working out of the gate. The software, of course, huge upgrades, and yeah, the auto leveling and all of that on the machine has been flawless so far. Creality Print 5.0 is an interesting thing. So the old version of Creality Print was something I advised nobody to use in the printing software. In fact, I said it worked, but it was undesirable, and I pointed people in the way of Orca. Orca was the slicer that I preferred to use the most. And I created a custom Orca profile, although I haven't uploaded it yet, for the the K2 Plus. And the Orca profile I created for it was based on the K1 Max, okay? That's how I did it, right? Well, most of the parameters are the same, I just borrowed a few things. And it didn't include the color printing, however, because it wasn't designed for that version of Orca. Creality Print version 5 is essentially Orca Slicer. They ditched the old, I think, Cura-based system, which was very clunky. The downside is, like, I've used it and it does work, and I've enjoyed using it for the most part. I do think the changes they've made to it to make it more Creality aligned have made it worse than Orca already was. I would have preferred they just stuck with Orca and created custom profiles within Orca but I understand most of these brands want to have their own proprietary software relating to the thing. I get it, Bambu Slicer, Prusa Slicer, yeah, everyone does it. And really it was Prusa Slicer that became Bambu Slicer, became Orca, which is now Creality Slicer. So go figure, right? Now, setting this machine up. Well, for a start, this picture is it's kind of fibbing to you. You're not going to set up your printer like that. I've managed to have something similar to this, but I've had to mount that CFS right next to the unit on that side of the machine. Also, those purgings coming out the back and picking up and moving this machine around, boy, do you not want to have to go through that rigmarole, because if you do, this machine is heavy. We're talking a 30-odd kilo machine, pushing 40 kilos, depending. It is not something you want to easily move around, because you can't easily move it around. I'm a big, strong guy, right? Many of you are as well. I'm telling you, I'm the kind of guy who can comfortably deadlift 100 very comfortably, right? 100 kilos, not 100 pounds. But I find this thing awkward because of the size and shape of it. Getting your arms around it, getting them underneath, it's more like lifting an Atlas stone than a dumbbell. So, yeah, not something you want to be moving around on the bench. Size-wise, yep, it's got all these things. And, yep, you've got the CFS, which is, again, improved. I'm going to give it its own custom video on that. Now, as for the materials, PETG, good. Carbon, PLA, good. ASA can be a very difficult material to print with because styrene tends to really warp as part of it is exposed to hot air, part of it is exposed to cold air. We get distortion warping. I didn't have any. In fact, I printed out what I think is a challenging piece of terrain from Sacris Mundus in ASA on this machine. And, well, yeah, perfect. Absolutely flawless. The Wi-Fi features, I haven't tested a lot of them out because I have it in a detached building from main premises, which doesn't have internet. So I haven't been using a lot of the wireless features. I have, however, been using the USB, and this is where I ran into pretty much all of my issues with the machine. See, when I first took the USB and first sliced a file, the very first one that I did, and I plugged it into the machine and I hit go, it did not offer me to pick any of the colors. I could only pick one. That was warning sign number 1. Warning sign number 2 was, after it had imported the file, it bricked the machine. They slang for the machine locked up. I couldn't touch anything on the screen and it just gave me warnings. I reset the machine, same issue happened. So I tried the file 3-4 times, and then in frustration, as soon as it had finished importing the file, I pulled the USB out, suddenly worked. And that's when I clued on. Some error was occurring in the version of the firmware that I had and the USB, and what was happening was as soon as you imported the file over and at 100%, and then the 100% icon went away, if you pulled the USB, worked perfectly. Brought the file over, you could set all the colors. Perfect, fantastic, great. Another thing that I found really quaint was the power off. So when you lose power or you power down the machine deliberately, I had both happen, by the way, the bed drops. The bed weighs so much, and it's only got the 2 screws, it drops. And it drops on an extreme angle. And I was very concerned about this. When I turn it back on though, it pulls the bed all the way to the bottom and then rights itself, move back up, took off again flawlessly. So although it looks really funky and is kind of terrifying, because if you've seen this happen on other printers, it's usually the death knell for your print, it actually worked flawlessly. So I was shocked by this. As I mentioned earlier though, also really bizarre that, the K1 Max had 3 Z-axis screws as well as linear rods to help it. This only has 2 and 4 linear rods. Very, very strange setup that, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. Also, the side-mounted spool holder. This thing is like the appendix. It's the vestigial organ left over from evolution of earlier times, you think, even though there's an RFID scanning tag right there for use with it. Why has it got a side-mounted spool holder? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because if you want to put TPU in there. See, TPU does not like going through these AMS-type systems because you have thermoplastic polyurethane is a very elastic material. Okay, it's like trying to pull a rubber band that's under tension at one end through a hose. Doesn't work very well, okay? So what you want is you want it to be essentially just fed straight through a tube the shortest distance possible into the extruder. That's what the side mount is there for. If you put it through the CFS system, you are going to be pushing it in and out with those other reels and it is going to jam. One of the pros, though, of the CFS over the AMS is the lack of jamming. Very reliable system because they learned from a lot of the mistakes of the older system, the AMS, but that's fine. Bambu has, it's set the path, okay? And if it wasn't for their actions, we wouldn't be seeing these kind of improvements in the industry. Now, my thoughts going forward on this are, what is going to happen long term? Is this machine going to stay in production for a long time? Is it going to get the support it needs? And many of you will be asking, particularly about that CFS, the color system, is that going to come to the other printers in Creality's lineup? And from what they have said to me, yes. As an engineer, I say no. I am very dubious of the claim that this will be a part that you can fit to the K1 series, K1, K1 Max, K1C, or I could guess maybe you could make it work easily enough on the Ender series. But the problem is, the way it's designed, you need to feed it through the extruder, you need to have a cut-off mechanism and a cleaning mechanism for the nozzle, as well as a purging output device, a slot for purged materials to fall through. No provision for this has been made in those other printer models, and it would be quite an extensive upgrade or modification to those machines to add this. We're talking about putting holes in things and putting additional parts in the machines. Radical changes, as well as then upgrading a whole bunch of software in order to make this function. I don't see that happening. If it does happen, I don't have hopes that it will be implemented well. So rather than trying to backwards engineer this system onto those printers, I would just be making future versions of those printers with the modifications of this machine taken into account. I don't want to be seeing a K3 series anytime soon. I want to be seeing more K2 machines, which are essentially those old K1 machines, but modernized with this system added to them. Namely, this extruder setup and with the cameras set up the way they are, the integrated light sources the way they are on this, the excellent quality of the internal moldings. Like, this machine does not feel cheap. And you'll go, oh, that's a very expensive price. Trust me, for the amount of size this thing can print and the quality, this is cheap, okay? This is something you would have paid 15 grand for 10 years ago, if that. And you would have had non-stop issues out of it at that price point. Today's age, no, this is fantastic. Will there be issues with it? Surely some are going to crop up. There's always issues with every printer ever, okay? I've had Bambu printers fail on me. People claim they never fail. I've had Prusa printers fail. People claim they never fail. All right? You get failures. You get failures in your oven at home, in your microwave, in your dishwasher, okay? And those are technologies that have been around for decades. So the thing is, what can you live with? And the failures I've had on this, they were perfectly acceptable. They were fine. That USB error early on, like, that's it. That's the worst thing that I've had happen to me. So what? Big whoop, you know? Quality-wise, this thing's great. I've made some fantastic terrain on this. The time-lapse features works great. I'm really happy with it, and I recommend it wholeheartedly. This is a better machine than Bambu's machines. And that says a lot, because that's sort of the benchmark. The only way to improve the system is the color swap system. And again, that's a lot of the use of colors. People use it wrong. You shouldn't be printing things like the displayed image here of the palace with all of the different colored rooftops and crenulations and stuff. It's a waste of the materials, okay? What you should be printing is things like gingerbread men with their icing on them, like I did, because that's really easy to do. And you minimize the color swaps because all of a layer is going to be the one color around the entire miniature. It's a better way to do things. But anyway, I digress. That's something for the CFS's personal episode. In any case, K2 Plus, can't recommend it highly enough. The build quality is the best I've ever seen out of Creality. It's working straight out of the box. The people that I've recommended to have purchased it on my recommendation have said theirs are working straight out of the box. What more can I ask for than that? Will there be errors? Surely there will be, but every brand has them. I hope they support this long term and don't bite off more than they can chew. And please, Creality, please just keep up the build quality. You can do a lot for your reputation if you do so. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching the video. Thoughts and comments below. Catch you on the next one.